This week, my mind has been on missionaries. A couple different reasons. Last Monday evening, I went to the Colorado Baptist Convention, and I got to hear one of my friends preach, Paul Chitwood. Paul is the president of the International Mission Board. International Mission Board has over 4,000 missionaries in some of the hardest to reach places in the world. So many of our international IMB missionaries are like the Green Beret of missionaries, and as he's preaching and he's telling stories, man, I was ready to run through a brick wall. I was like, all right, let's charge hell with a squirt gun, like whatever it takes, I'm willing. Sign my whole church up, we're all going. And just so you know, if you get something in the mail, that's why. You're signed up with the mission field now. No, I'm just kidding, maybe. And, so there's that, and I heard them, and it got me thinking about some of my other missionary friends. The war in Israel and Palestine, the Gaza Strip, it got brought to my attention that we have missionaries in both places. And so in both places, in the middle of what is a war-torn area, do we have people trying to bring the hope of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, to both Muslims and Jews. And hearing that, that's been on my mind. It's like, here we are, we're signed up to take the good news, and now we're caught in the middle of war. And like, what sacrifice? That literally, when you do that, you're saying, okay, I'm putting my life on the line. And it got me thinking about some other missionaries from the past. Chris Parrish actually mentioned them in his sermon last week. He brought up the Moravian missionaries. And the Moravian is an ethnic group. It's ethnic people. They're Slavic in nature. They were what modern day kind of Czech Republic would be. Some of those people would live where Germany is. And in the early 1700s. And so you see this missionary movement happen. So much of our Protestant history and the Protestant Reformation and the missionary movements that happen can go back to seeing. Even when we talk about in our history, a John Wesley, a William Carey, like these great people in our church history were influenced by the Moravian movement of missionaries. And Chris mentioned last week kind of briefly some of the extreme things that the Moravian missionaries would do. Moravian missionaries, they had this zeal to go to the ends of the earth, to take the gospel. At one point, so not just talking about the Moravian church, but the people group, the Moravians, 1 out of like every 12 were somewhere else in the world doing missions. Right? So think about that. So that's not like saying, imagine we would be like super proud if 1 out of every 12 of us went to the nations to do missions. We're talking about like the people who live there, 1 out of every 12. Like it was so many people. And so they would do things like sell themselves into slavery, into what, when we think about slavery and chattel slavery, like they would sell themselves into that so that they would lose everything they have, and they would be able to go, and they would have to be in this forced labor, but in order to tell people about Jesus. And, for them, it was like, this is a boat ride to an island of people that we can get there and tell them about Jesus. Often, when Moravians would get on boats to go places, to travel the seas, to go somewhere, they would pack their belongings in a pine box, a casket. They would put everything they would own in a casket, and they would go, everything I need is right here in this casket. And they would ship off, literally willing to give their lives. You ever heard the term burn the ships? It's actually, this is something we hear happen in missionary movements during that time. And there's a lot of different stories, and probably a lot of them aren't true. But we see this kind of ethos that was like, we're going to go, and when we get there, we're going to take and burn the ship that it took to get us here, so that we don't get scared and back out and go home. Like we are all in. And so you hear these stories about these missionaries that would go to places like Scotland, and they would literally burn their boats. They were all in. And we think about these missionaries. We think about modern day missionaries. We think missionaries from the past. This is what we know. It cost them a lot. it cost them everything. And I kind of look back on those guys, and in my sinfulness, I can look at them and go, man, they're like heroes. These guys are like heroes of the faith. But I guarantee you, if you would have asked them, are you a hero? They would say, no. I'm just a Christ follower. I'm just a follower of Jesus, and this is what Jesus followers do. As we jump into our text today, here's the big truth that I want us to walk away with and I want us to see. It's this, that salvation is free, but following Jesus will cost you everything. Not too long ago, I preached from Luke chapter 9, and it's a very similar passage, and I actually had the exact same big truth. And I started to do a different one, and I was just going to note that this was a big truth, and I was like, no, this big truth highlights what this passage is about. Salvation is free. Coming to Christ, your salvation, your forgiveness of sins, it is absolutely free. There is nothing you can do to buy it. It doesn't matter what your works are, what your effort is, how much money you have, how much you give, whatever human standard you want to put on it, there's nothing that can earn you favor and forgiveness with God. Here's the story of the gospel, the good news, is that God created everything that we have. He created man, He created us in His own image, and it was good. He put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and they were sinless, they were without sin, and things were good. And He gave them these really specific rules, and they broke them. And sin entered the world. And from that point on, the world was broken. And it doesn't take us looking around far to look through history to see that there is sin, there is disobedience and rebellion towards God. And that disobedience and rebellion towards God puts distance between us and God. It separates us from God. In the Old Testament, we see the sacrificial system where they